get ready for one of the best organic, natural ways to grow your business that doesn't require a lot of time, doesn't require a lot of money. And if it sounds too good to be true, I'll tell you the only reason why people don't do it more often is because they don't know how to do it effectively. So I am talking all about podcast guesting. And in this episode, I'm going to walk you through the process to do it, why it helps you attract so many clients, why it gets you off the hamster wheel of constant content creation, why it establishes you as an authority, a thought leader in your space, and it brings people to you long after your interview is published. So lots of good stuff here. And I want to start by saying this because if you're coming to this and you don't know who I am, I want to give you context so you're not like, who the heck is this that's telling me about podcast guesting? So I am a top-ranked, top 200 host, ranked by Apple Podcasts. I have 2 podcasts. Both of those have been ranked. I've interviewed over 250 guests over the last 4 years. And I've also been a guest on top 1% shows. So everything I'm sharing with you is from both sides of the mic. From how do you get on the show to how do you find the right show, and also how do you make sure that when you're on it, you are really captivating listeners. Now, because this is a podcast episode, it's going to be fairly short and I can't pack everything in here. So if you do want more specifics on strategy after you listen here, you can see in the show notes, I have a 3-part, very quick video series on how to grow your business and attract clients as a podcast guest. Completely recommend that as a next step. Or even if you want to skip this video, you can go straight into that. So let's begin. I don't know about you, but I have never wanted to be an influencer. I have never wanted to share my private life. I was so excited when the whole Instagram era of everybody having perfectly beige flat lays and their coffee's in the right place and they're dressed perfectly and they have makeup. I was so happy when that ended because it was so much effort for me to be that person. And I have always found that my way to grow is not really in social media. I like connecting to people there, but it was just a strategy I never wanted to have. And for many years, it's what I did because I didn't know anything else. This is why I'm sharing with you the else, the podcast guesting, because the podcasting world took me from really struggling online. I had always been an in-person entrepreneur. I had an in-person business. And then I found myself in this position, which you might relate to, where it was 2020 and it crumbled. So overnight, my business fell apart, the business that I had built for 7 years. And I want to say, it sounds like this would be so sad, but I was honestly really relieved when it happened. That's a whole nother story. But it allowed me to go online. And what I found is that when I was in the early stages of growing my business, something came into my life that just changed everything, and that was podcasting. So I started out as I had a friend who had a show. She invited me on it. A few weeks later, I got my first client who said she found me from that episode. And then I got another one and another, and people kept coming from this one interview with a very small show and a friend that had just started. So the audience was just people who already knew her. But this is the benefit of podcasting for you, because if you can start a show, that is one of the most valuable things ever. But if you're not ready or it's not something that appeals, this is the next best thing. You are essentially getting access to an audience of people who really want what you are offering. They're already invested. Imagine it's like this. I always take, if you listen to me ever, you know that I compare everything to dating. Because you get it. So imagine this. It's like if you go on a date with someone who already accepts and has pre-qualified themselves for everything that you are looking for. That experience is so much easier and smoother than if you're in a situation where you're trying to convince someone to like you, which you should never do anyway. And if you look at, there's a pyramid that you can look at after this, where it shows you the stages of awareness that people are at. And most people are at the bottom of the pyramid, meaning they don't even realize they have a problem. They're not problem aware. And while you're targeting those people, which are the hardest people to get, there are so many above that make more sense, and podcasting targets them. So these are people who are problem aware. They know they have an issue that you work with. They are also solution aware, which is the real important part here, meaning that they understand that the solution is something that you do, be it coaching, digital products, they already know, they're bought in. And on top of that, they are hearing from you with the recommendation, the social proof of a podcast host, someone they consider because they listen to every week while they're brushing their teeth, making their dinner, driving in their car. That is what you get from this. And that's why podcast guesting is so incredibly powerful for you. So when you're a podcast guest, what that means is you are going on someone else's show to share your journey and to share your expertise. And then afterwards, those people come and find you, enter your world, and buy from you. That is the seamless journey that we get from podcasting. Now, things that you might not realize about it, why it's so great. You do a 30-minute to 1 hour interview. You don't have to do any of the marketing for it. Of course, you share it with your people, but the bulk of the marketing is actually done by the host. They're also doing the SEO for you, usually, if it's a good show, which is what I teach people how to get on. So that's going to be searchable. And nowadays, podcasts, because of the AI technology used in Google and other search engines, podcasts are actually searchable by their content. And that episode that you do is searchable for years. I still have people, even though I'm no longer doing wellness coaching, I still have people from that first episode I told you about coming in and talking to me. This is years later. If you're wondering what podcast guesting really involves, you can do this in just a couple hours every month once you have the right pieces. What I teach people to do is quickly find shows that align with you, quickly create an email that converts, that they want to hear, that resonates, to know how to give a powerful interview where your messaging connects. And this is a skill you can use across space, not just in podcasting, also social media, also anything you do. And then to have a clear pathway where someone can say, okay, I heard this message. I like this person. Here's what I do next to buy. Just a few hours to set that up and manage it each month. Even the people who don't buy from you are going to hear your message. You're going to help them. And a lot of those people, even if they don't buy themselves, they might refer you to someone else. It's so common and so easy to share a podcast episode. So think about, in this day and age when people have very little short attention spans, they don't even make it to 7-second reels. How amazing is it when you can connect to someone for 30 minutes to an hour of your voice playing in their ear as you're interviewed by someone who they trust? To me, when you frame it that way, I can't imagine not doing it. And the strategy is very simple. Your goal can be as easy as just getting on one show a month to supplement what you're doing. It doesn't have to take tons of time. It doesn't have to be another thing, but it can give you so much. The money, the purpose, but also too the networking, the community. I've had some amazing collaborations come from the guests that I've met on my shows. And I've had many clients even recently go through my Pod Boost program that didn't have a lot of experience. And they went and they followed this method, followed this strategy, and within 2 months, we're on shows. So it's so possible for you. And a lot of people don't do this because they don't know where to begin. And they're also afraid of one more thing to do. But I want to tell you this now. If you look at your business, whether it's doing well or not, and you look at how you're marketing or what you're not doing, would you be happy if you were in the same place doing it the same way in 1 year? And if you're not, why not try something new? Of course, there are ways that people get tripped up. And if you've spoken to someone or you yourself have been someone who's been on a podcast and maybe nothing happened, there are some things that you have probably gotten a little off in that process, which is okay. I'm going to go through them with you. Again, if you want more strategies and really diving into this, watch that 3-part training series. You can see the link in the notes. I also have a program which is all about how to do this, from the pitching, like writing the email, finding the right shows, what to say, how to prepare, how to make a revenue stream from this, how to make it easier and not take up a lot of time. It's called Pod Boost. You can find that on the Her First 3 Years website or also in the show notes. Now let's talk about where people go wrong. I have been on both sides of this. First is the wrong show. It's not enough to just be on any podcast. And I will say I actually probably got lucky in some ways, lucky quotation, because with the first podcast I was on was my friend's, and I didn't really think about is it aligned or not. Luckily, it worked. But also, she was in the women's empowerment space. I was too, so that was aligned. And she also had a really strong community of people who followed her, even though it was small. Those are the two most important things. You've got to choose a show which is aligned with what you do, and they need to have an engaged community. If they're not engaged, you are not going to have any follow-up. Nothing's going to happen. That's the most important thing. So picking the right show, that determines a lot. I show you how to do this in that 3-part live series. When you're selecting a podcast, do it not just because it's big. In fact, a lot of my clients have come from smaller shows. Do it because it deeply aligns with your values, what you do. Because 1, it's an easier yes for that host. And 2, it's an easier yes for their listeners to come find you. Now, the second thing that people trip up on is, let's say they got a great show. You're in women's empowerment, they're in women's empowerment, they've got an engaged community. You know this is the right show for you. You send an email, you try to get on. No answer. Crickets. This is the pitching process, and it's what intimidates a lot of people because they don't like the rejection. But they're also going about it in a very lazy way. What's very common these days is agencies, podcast agencies, they will go and they will charge a client thousands of dollars a month to take their profile, it's their headshot, their bio, and send it, basically spam all of us podcast hosts, going for numbers rather than for quality match. I had someone recently who is extremely successful in their field, a medical practitioner, and I get this email with a subject line, Limp Myths, Hard Facts. And it's a guy who works with other men, he's a doctor, in helping them grow their girth and their length. Now, my podcast is called Feel Good Naked, to be fair to this person, but it's a podcast for women in the title. And in this pitch, this agent is talking all about how my male listeners can benefit from hearing this. The male listeners are like 1%. That's not an aligned show. There are many shows I can think of that would do fine on, but mine is not one of them. And also the pitch is not good. The pitch is not tailored to me. The pitch is not anything that aligns. I ignore it. Knowing how to write a pitch which really shows you recognize the show is important, but it doesn't take as much time as you think. This is, again, something I do in that live training. I will show you an example of a bad pitch, the elements of why, and a good pitch, why that works. Now, the next thing where people mess up, and know this, already by you listening to this, you are already ahead. And I want you to know too that if you have the right strategies in place, this can be really easy. It doesn't need to take a lot of time. So the next thing that people struggle with is their storytelling. So they could get the right show, they could get the yes, they get on, but they're not really telling their story in a captivating way. They're also not doing a great job of selling their offer in a way that feels not icky, but feels aligned. And so nobody does anything after. And I think this is probably the biggest problem that people have is, how do I communicate and message in a way that resonates? And that problem probably shows up in more than just doing podcasts. Probably shows up in your Instagram, your newsletters with conversion rates that are a lot lower than you'd like. It's not anything against you. I've been there. It is very common. But this is why, for example, in Pod Boost, that program I have, I am going through how to message and target, which is a skill you can use in everything, because it really is often the problem. We like to blame the tech. We like to blame the algorithm. Sometimes it's fair. A lot of times it's just how we do our messaging. Now, the last thing that people struggle with, and this is one that kind of breaks my heart a little bit because they get everything else right. So they find a great show, it's engaged, the person says yes. They tell an amazing story. They really talk about how to work with them in really good ways, but there's no clear pathway. So someone leaves that show and they have to chase down how to work with someone, how to buy from them. They see maybe an offer that doesn't make sense or they're not ready for it because that person has not created a natural funnel from their podcast episode interview to buy. You might already have a funnel. You might be aware of them, but not every funnel makes sense. So for example, if I go on a podcast and I'm talking all about my wellness knowledge and wisdom, but then someone goes to my site and all they can do is get podcasting stuff, they are not going to enter my world. So really tailoring and making that a seamless process, the funnel aspect is something that I also teach and I also talk about in this 3-part series. Podcast guesting is also an opportunity for you to reach a wider audience and for you to become a thought leader in your space, because you might already be successful in what you're doing or you're building it. But imagine if you were also known as the person for it. If, for example, someone says, hey, you're looking for a wellness coach, I know someone that I heard on this podcast, let me send you that episode. I talk again and again about how most of my referrals or downloads come from WhatsApp. So someone takes my podcast episode and they share it with their friends and family. They share it in their WhatsApp groups. Imagine the power of how many people you get in front of through that. And they don't have to even go into Instagram. They don't need to go into YouTube. You get in front of so many more people. It's also the next logical step after someone has found you on social media. How do you create a deeper connection? You want to think about, and this is a comparison I did recently, where when someone likes you or follows you on social media, that's the equivalent of swiping right on you. They've said, yep, interested, I want to know more. But it's also not a lot of investment because they can do that for anyone. So how do you then take it from the swipe to the real connection? That is the podcasting. And if you are, and I'm going to name a few types of people here that you might be, if you are any of these types of people, you need to be doing podcasting as a growth strategy. And I'll tell you why. If you are an author, a thought leader, a speaker, podcasting is essential for you because it's basically a resume. It's showing who you are, what you believe in, how you speak. A very easy way for people to find you and to know more about your book if you're an author. If you are a coach, a course creator, a small business owner, it is a way for people to get to know more than just what they see on the screen, to connect with you as a person, to trust you. That is who they will buy from. These are the people that essentially you need to be on in podcasting in some way. It needs to be part of your strategy because otherwise you are leaving that connection behind, a huge part of the customer journey. And you're also leaving out a big segment of people that could follow you. Beyond that, this can save you time if you do it right. The last thing that I get asked about a lot is, well, what is the monetary benefit of being on a podcast? How can I know that I'm going to make money from this? If you get the elements right that I talked about, you get on a good show that's engaged, your messaging is strong and on point, and you have a real pathway from that episode to your offer, then what you can do is you can make sure that you capture this audience. And let's give an example like this. Let's say that you are in 3 podcasts, and let's say you have a $500 offer. Let's make it really small. Let's make each of these podcast has 100 regular listeners, 100 engaged people. If you get the right shows, it will be much more, but let's say it's 100. And let's say you convert 1%. So for every show, you're getting 1 client who's buying your $500 offer. You've just made $1,500 from 3 hours of work, 1 hour per show. But that's only in the immediate release because also more people will find you in the weeks and months, even years to come. Also think about the customer life cycle. So they might not just buy 1 product from you, but several. So you can see how even with these tiny numbers, a tiny audience of 100 people, you converting at a tiny percentage of 1%, what that can mean for you. what that can do for you. Compare that in contrast with social media, where you're lucky if 10% of your people, let alone someone else's, are seeing your content. And then from that, another 1% are supposed to buy. So you can see how hard it is when you have a tiny following, how hard it can be if you're not doing as well as you like on social media. And even if you are, how hard you have to work to keep those people seeing your stuff. This is an amazing supplemental strategy. You continually will only grow and scale if you experiment. You cannot just do the same thing forever. It doesn't work. So be open to something new. And I'm sharing with you my strategies. I'm sharing with you exactly what I teach people in a 3-part free video series. Now, in that video series, I talk about Pod Boost. I talk about joining that program. I've made that program really accessible to be able to do. Even if you don't join, and even if you just watch those videos, you will be able to go away and do this. Now, you see the links for Pod Boost for that 3-part series in the show notes. You can also go to Her First 3 Years to see them. You can find me, Sade Rael, on Instagram. But I encourage you to think about this, because I know that you have an amazing story. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a creator, you have lived differently. You can help people. And podcasting is such an amazing way for you to do it. I will see you in the next episode.